I'm Jonathan Crocker, and welcome to the Ren Faire History podcast presented by the digital Ren Faire. You can find me at the Ohio Renaissance Festival, performing as Jake the Wild Man in the Theater on the Ground mud shows, and also as Dr. Cranius Lunch at the Arizona Renaissance Festival, performing with the Wild Men. And we have Facebook pages for the Wild Men and Theater on the Ground, and websites for both of those programs as well. And I'm here today with Carl Asch.
Ta-da! Hello, everyone. Let's see, where can you find me? EmptyHats.com. You can find me on Facebook on the Ooops Comedy Knife Throwing Show, or Carl Asch.
Excellent. Well, welcome. I'm looking
Thank
forward
you.
to
Thanks
to
for
chatting
having
with you. We've known each other for a while.
Oh, yeah.
I think we met at Scarborough Fair in about 1980 something. Or 90? When was that?
Oh,
You know, 80s.
It's terrible. It's definitely in the 80s.
Late
Definitely
80s.
in
Late
the
80s, I think.
Late 80s, yeah.
Yeah, and how long had you been doing Renaissance festivals at that time?
Scarborough that year was my second festival.
Oh.
I had only done one festival beforehand, a little festival. It was its last year in Key Biscayne, Florida.
Okay.
That was my very first one that I stumbled across. I had never heard of a Renaissance fair before, even though I had performed busking as a Renaissance jester.
Really? And where was that?
New York City, Central Park.
Okay.
Did that for a couple of years, then did it in Milan. I did it got arrested in Milan.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah, that was fun. That was fun.
Feather in your cap. There.
Yeah. Did it in France and Germany. So traveled about as a Renaissance jester. Had never heard of a Renaissance fair, and I was living aboard a ship in Miami.
Uh-huh.
And then I saw a poster for a Renaissance fair. So I went and got a gig.
Right.
Got a gig for the last weekend of that fair. Loved it and went, oh, well, this is my life.
What was it that captured you? What was your experience
Well,
there?
what was cool is that it was so much easier to get a crowd in a Renaissance festival than on the streets of Central Park in a Renaissance costume.
Sure.
So it was perfect. It was just perfect. You know,
Plug and play.
And I felt like, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but a lot of times Empty Hats will perform at the front gate, as a lot of minstrels do,
right?
When the gates open. And sometimes you can see people walking through the gate and they just go, I'm home. You can just feel it, that this is their tribe.
Right.
I definitely had that weekend. It was first weekend I met a guy named Dr. John, who was a tarot reader. And I mean, I fell in love with the whole thing. And luckily, I'd already booked, by the time I was done, I'd already booked Scarborough Fair because a lot of people didn't get paid. That they had lost their shirts
because
that weekend.
Because
the show closed. So I did get paid, but I'd already booked Scarborough. So it was great. I mean, I just hitchhiked to Scarborough.
Wow.
Lived in a small little tent, which somebody had when I was talking to a friend of mine who was a big camper in New Jersey, where I grew up. They said, "Oh, if you want to make your tent nice and soft, take a bale of hay, put it underneath the tent." Just spread it out underneath the tent.
Yeah, right.
And I was like, oh, that's great. And it made it really soft. Of course, they don't have chiggers in New Jersey. And I was covered in chiggers my first year on the circuit.
I could just imagine you hitchhiking from New Jersey with a bale of hay.
Yeah.
I got to have this for my camping. I don't want the chiggers.
That's right. So, yeah, didn't know about that. So it's, Renaissance fairs is quite the learning curve.
Oh, it sure
in every possible way. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And camping at Scarborough in particular will teach you lots of things.
Yeah.
About chiggers, about fire ants.
Mud.
Mud.
Have you done Scarborough?
I've heard about the mud.
So the mud is, because it's mostly clay, for those of you who have never been. So it's mostly clay. So if it rains and you walk from one side of the fair to the other, by the time you get to the other side of the fair, your feet will be 5 feet long. I mean, it just collects this clay and you can't get it off. It's easier to just buy new boots for the next weekend. So,
what year was that?
again, I'm guessing
88.
Yeah, maybe 88, 89. What I consider my first professional job was 1982, the World's Fair in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I haven't had a straight job since. So everything, that's sort of the starting point. And then I think Renaissance Fairs was either 1 or 2 years after that.
Okay.
So
yeah, maybe 86.
Yeah, maybe
85 in there.
So,
okay. Yeah.
just loved it. It was the first time I met Michael Marzella,
Mm-hmm.
who just blew me away. I mean, yeah, he was just an amazing, and the characters, we don't have as many lifestyle characters now as we used to. Artemis or Artist the Spoon Man,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
These were just characters that are just phenomenal.
Were they
Renowned.
characters in the fair? Or
And
are
characters
you
in life as well. I mean, Artist the Spoon Man was just he was out there, and he did bubbles, and he just did a show of spoons, and it was
He was
incredible.
an amazing
Yeah.
spoon player, and actually played with the symphony orchestra out in Portland, I think,
Uh-huh.
at least somewhere on the
Yeah.
West Coast. Played with Frank Zappa.
Wow,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, what he could do musically with a couple of wooden spoons and some knives and forks and spoons. He had a whole array of silverware and salad implements that he had laid out in
Did
front of
you
him.
ever play with him?
I did, actually. yeah,
Because
yeah.
spoons, cutlery, and vegetables. What a great!
I did not play vegetables at that
Oh,
time.
okay. Oh, that would
I played
be.
bones, so I jammed with
Okay.
him with bones. a
I
little
see.
bit.
Okay, but that would be a
That would be too
perfect.
much.
You know the salad sessions.
Yeah.
You know?
Well,
Great.
we'll have to have a Kickstarter for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Artemis Thorne, you mentioned, who traveled the country driving a hearse.
Driving a hearse with a dog in a wheelchair in its later years. Yeah, it
Yeah.
lost its ability to walk, so he had 2 wheels on its hind legs. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, he was a lovely man. Lovely, very sarcastic,
Mm-hmm.
very
Dark
very,
humor.
very dark humor. Yeah, lovely guy.
I met someone named Artemis at one of Jerry Berry's parties, but he's not with us. This one you're talking about?
Artist the Spoon Man and Artemis.
Or two.
Big,
Artist-
long beard.
I think-
Tall, lanky. Big, tall beard.
And he talked about selling food, and he knew all about the history of like the turkey legs and things.
Yeah, that might be him.
Yeah. Did he do like haunted houses and that sort of
I think
thing?
so, but I'm not sure.
And he would have been like older than either of us. He's,
Yes.
he's
Yeah, he
probably in
was-
the 70s.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My first meeting of Michael Marzella as the king at Scarborough Fair. And I always say he's the best king in the biz. You know, he's just the best.
For those who don't know Michael, he's about 6'5", 6'6".
Yeah.
And
Portly and
has a basso profundo that will just simply rumble your bones.
Yeah. Just, and smart as a whip. I
Yeah,
mean, just Mensa smart. And my first day at Scarborough Fair, and they asked me to perform at the feast. So I took 3 juggling axes. All right, I'll do my axe routine. And he calls me up, and I go, how art thou, your majesty? And he stands to his foot, full 6'5", looks down and says, "Thou? You deign to refer to your monarch as thou?" And it was my first day on the job. I shrank to about 2 inches, and I'm like, I think I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but I'm not sure why. And he launched into this tirade of how thou is the familiar, not the formal, and that you is the formal. So I should, in fact, say, how are you, Your Majesty? So he got to launch into this whole thing. And I, of course, I left there practically crying. I'll never work here again.
Scolded by the king.
Scolded
No.
by the king. I'm so glad I'm not really in the Renaissance. And then he came up to me, 10, 15 minutes later. He says, that was really great. Let's do that every day. Because it gave him a reason to expound. So every day at the feast, it was, how can Giacomo piss off the king? So that was my job.
That's a perfect jester role.
Perfect jester role, right. One day, I got him.
Yeah.
Yeah, one day I said, how art thou, your majesty? Thou, you deign to go, your majesty, thou? And I said, well, of course, your majesty. Why would I not? He says, I know that the rules of King's English is you use thou when you are referring to your pets, your children, your inferiors, and God. Are you not of divine birth, your majesty? Are you not of divine right? Are you not the divine king? And he just looked at me and went, well played, Giacomo. So it was really great.
Nice. Yeah. I appreciated Michael and his wife, Marilyn, at the time. We're so steeped in the history, the customs that, and it brought everybody up, and inspired everybody to
absolutely
to bring a better game. After Scarborough, what was your next move?
I'm not sure I can tell you accurately.
Okay.
I mean, they all sort of, after almost 35 years, they all sort of blend in together.
But at that point, you pretty much went whole hog for Renaissance festivals, for booking fairs, and
yeah, I did the Tuxedo Fair in New York, near New York City.
Right. What New York City people call upstate New York, and everybody else calls downstate.
Downstate New York, right? Which is very confusing because it's in a place called Sterling Forest in Tuxedo, New York. And so I remember at one year, at some point, meeting a woman and saying, oh, I'm going to Sterling. And she said, oh, I'm going there too, so we'll meet up. And then the following year I went, I thought you said you were going to Sterling. I was there. Where were you? Well, I was going to Sterling in upstate in Syracuse, and she was in Sterling Forest at that point. So, we just missed one another.
I know people who have showed up for the wrong job.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, that would be bad.
Got hired as a pub wench at the Sterling Forest Fair, and actually thought she was from New York. She thought she was going to the Sterling Forest Fair, and ended up being Sterling, New York.
Oh, really? Wow. Yeah.
So she had a bigger commute that year than she expected to.
So I did Sterling. I did Florida shows. I did Largo. Sterling Forest, Tuxedo, is where I met Chiara, Caleb's mom.
Right. Started that phase of your life.
Started that phase. Yeah. And that must have been either, I'm going to guess 85 or 86, because Caleb was born in 87.
Okay.
Meeting Chiara, and neither one of us took this traveling thing or this performing at fairs all that seriously. It was really fun. I loved it. I loved going to Europe a lot. So met Chiara, worked at Walt Disney World at Epcot. Mm-hmm. And then Chiara got pregnant. Yeah. But I will forever be grateful to Chiara, because when she got pregnant, I was terrified of about to be a dad. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to get a job. I'm going to have to get a 3-piece suit, and I'm in an attaché case, and really, really make a living and stuff like that. And eschew this gypsy life that I've started to create for myself. And she said, no. Says, I don't want your father to be the father of this child. I want you to be the father of this child. I'm very grateful to her for that, because I would have given this up, and if that felt like that was required of me. But we had to make it work. Right. So now I had to take it a little more seriously, financially and responsibly than I had in the past, So, and make more phone calls than I had in the past, So
spend more time at payphones.
Payphones, oh my God. Yes, for all of you youngins out there, let me tell you, trying to book a gig at payphones. Whoo, that was That was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you'd get their answering machine and you'd go call the entertainment director. Hi, I'm in Texas somewhere. I'll stay at this payphone for 15 minutes. If you can call me back, the number is, and you'd, of course, 15 minutes later, you'd get back in the bus and keep driving, and maybe stop,
Next time
another hour or something and try again with, your bag of quarters. The cell phone, and the Rubbermaid bin and the bungee cord have made this lifestyle possible.
For me, there was another side to this only having contact when you had a point of contact, like when you had to be at a phone to be contacted or to contact people.
Right.
I think fairs changed, I won't say for the worse, but they changed dramatically when cell phones came around because there was this sense of sort of village life that a Renaissance festival produced, where people actually strolled around to see who they might run into. And that would be your social life for the day. You didn't make plans and text and say, I'll meet you here, I'll do this. Let's have that.
Sure.
Just, you would set off on a walk and see who might be around, see who might be home. And so they're all, or meet somebody new that you hadn't known before, or see somebody at work at their shop making jewelry and stop for a chat.
Absolutely.
And all of this sort of serendipity, happenstance really created a whole different flavor within the festival communities.
Sure.
Especially during the week.
How long did it take you to find the Sterling Renaissance Festival the first and second time that you went without Google?
I did pretty well. I got in my 1972 Toyota Corolla. It was at that time, I think, firing on 3 cylinders, and drove from Vermont and managed to follow. I guess at that point, Gary had given the directions to enough people enough times that he had it down to
down. Sure,
go 0.65 miles,
right?
And it won't look like a road, but
Yeah.
But I arrived after dark. At that time, it was like in a dark sky part of the world. There were no houses nearby. There were no lights. It was dark, and it was the dark of the moon. And I parked in this field, and there was the faint line, like see a darker line against the sky over the lake, against the stars that said, okay, there's a line of trees there. I guess I'll head for the line of trees because the festival must be in there somewhere. And as I got closer, I saw a little glimmer of light through the trees of a campfire. And so I headed for the campfire, and there were 3 people sitting around the campfire. Jennifer Jackson and Mark Allen of the Mime, who she was with at the time, and a guy named Dan O'Donnell, who was one of the Queen's Guards who had gotten there early. And so those were the first 3 people I met. And
I never met Mark Allen. He had already passed by the time I got there.
Sad story.
But I heard about him.
Yeah. And they sort of pointed me off in the direction of the privies, where there was a second story, which was kind of the bunkhouse, landing spot for people. And rolled out my bedroll and started swatting mosquitoes.
You just went into the woods. And then there were people there. And then they were like, we're going to make this festival happen in like 3 days.
No, this was way early because Sterling, I was hired in the cast at Sterling, which meant we had a month of rehearsals.
Now let me get this right. You're both at Sterling, the festival,
upstate New York.
The Sterling Renaissance Festival.
At the Sterling Renaissance Festival.
Yes, that's the one we're talking about now.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
Verifying.
I'll always refer to the one down south as Tuxedo.
Okay.
Generally, to make it clear. Because the nearest town is Tuxedo, New York.
The nearest town for Sterling is Syracuse.
Sterling. There's a town, Sterling. Oswego.
So Sterling is the town. Fairhaven is the nearest town that has a town.
Right.
Oswego is the nearest city, and Syracuse is the nearest major city.
Yeah.
Like with an airport.
Right.
Great.
The Sterling Festival, the Sterling Fair, at that time it was the Renaissance Fair and Summer Marketplace at Sterling, New York.
Oh, okay.
And the byline on their business card and posters was, a beautiful place for beautiful people to do beautiful things.
Wow.
This was 1982, and the 70s. were still alive.
Uh-huh.
The man who started Sterling had fallen in love with the whole Renaissance Fair thing in Southern California when the fair started there.
Right. This was Dennis Ouellette?
Dennis Ouellette, yeah.
Ouellette.
And that had been his vision, was to create an arts fair with performing and music and a place for people to come out into his property in the woods up there in the middle of nowhere in upstate New York and create something new and beautiful.
Yeah.
And then he died.
Well, he succeeded.
He succeeded.
He succeeded beautifully.
And when those first few years that I was there was very much a palpable sense memory of his presence. I never met him. But,
yeah, neither had I. Jerry had already owned it by the time I got there. And that vision was beautifully executed by Gary Izzo, of course. I mean, and I'm not saying that just to suck up, but he's done an incredible job, Gary, and really set the standard as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Yeah, circling back to the Marzellas, that's where I met Michael and Marilyn, was at Sterling.
Okay.
And there was a whole greater sense of wanting to bring out the educational aspect and the artistic aspect of what was going on. I think fairs have shifted more towards entertainment as a genre, and less. At that time, it was on the fringes of living history.
Sure.
I remember mornings going out, and the cast would start stamping out the tire tracks of the trash truck that had been through the night before to pick up the trash, so that there were no remnants of 20th century.
Sure.
Visible.
Yeah, I mean, Sterling has always been sort of the biggest anachronarch festival of almost all of them. You know, of trying to be as pure, which is why I think Gary Izzo never really liked independence as much, because he didn't have as much control.
So when you say independence, you're talking about independent acts.
Stage acts, yes, as opposed to hired cast.
Right.
Yeah, we were always, I think, sort of a necessary evil. You know.
How so?
Well, because we would come in with our already established act. It was already there, and he didn't write our stuff, and he didn't train us. So we were a little more anachronistic than the cast
or
was.
perhaps much more anachronistic at times.
I mean, and it became more and more. Yeah. And then now in the last 10 years, you know, most stage acts have no Renaissance sense at all. Most acts, especially the ones coming up, you know, they don't try to do a character or an accent or a dialect of any kind. Which I think is a shame, but I get it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a different thing. You know,
right.
Involves. So, but I've always, you know, when I hear people going, "Hi guys," kind of makes me cringe a little bit. You know, from the stage. "Hi guys." Well, okay, that's where we're at now. Okay. Right. And still talented performers. I'm not taking away from their talent.
And who was Gary Izzo?
He's the entertainment director at the Sterling Festival. He went on to be the entertainment director at the Pennsylvania Fair for a long time and established their program. I don't think he did it for very long.
He didn't. He did, I think, for 1 year. Then Brian Belge and
Dennis
Johnson took over.
I see.
But they had Sterling heritage.
So they kept that format, that template.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
And then Gary Mazu took over. When Gary Mazu took over Pennsylvania, that's when I started PA. And it was funny, too, because I always felt like Pennsylvania had the same amount of talent as Sterling, but their relationship to the Renaissance was all completely tongue-in-cheek, as opposed to they were pretending to be in the Renaissance as to being in the Renaissance. They would have characters named Marilyn Merlot, you know, and so they were everything was very tongue-in-cheek and campy at the Pennsylvania show. And again, there's no owner's manual, so do what you want to do.
Yeah, I noticed that same sort of shift, and the distinction between what was presented at Sterling at that time in that era, as opposed to most other festivals. And the distinction I started to draw in my mind was the difference between comedy and farce. Whereas Sterling, it was a comedy that did not nod or wink at itself.
Right, absolutely.
Whereas most other festivals, it's a slightly easier fit, especially for entertainers coming into the scene with their own material, to treat it as farce,
right?
And refer to the Renaissance in either explicitly or implicitly in their material, as opposed to try to immerse themselves in it and come through that to an audience who is now struggling to grasp just what it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah, right.
And Sterling had this unique position where it started so small. I mean, when I first did Sterling in 1982, we had many days of 500 or 600 people in the park, and 1,000 was a big day. And we had a cast of about 25 people, probably including the Shakespeare troupe. So the ratio there is incredible, and the ability to transmit to the audience that sense of being in a place. Misty and I talked about this in the first episode of the show, the sense of being relentlessly true to character and context, and drawing the audience into that. And at some point, the audience would release their resistance to that and say, oh, I don't understand, but I will play along. And when I do, everything glows. You know, it becomes fun and just the sense of giving over to trust in the circumstance.
Right.
And then that becomes so enchanting that the next year they bring their friends and start to prime a whole wider circle. And so Sterling kind of developed this culture. And I think every fair does develop its own internal culture. But that level of commitment
one thing
hasn't really grown up anywhere.
That I think was Gary Izzo's intention was he had this Greek word called temenos, which was a safe place in which to play. And that was his mission statement. It was a safe place in which to play.
Right.
And I've always loved that.
Yeah, look up temenos. It's a great word.
It's a great word. I wanted to name, when we had to go from Double Indemnity to Empty Hats, temenos was on the short list. I didn't like the word temenos. Didn't appeal to me as a word. I loved the meaning. But I didn't like the word, so it didn't make the cut. But I love the concept of it. And the other thing is that one of the things that I think Sterling shines at is I think it has the best pub sing in the country.
Yes.
Bar none. Bar none. There's no other.
And again, I think it's because of that distinction between farce and comedy.
Right.
It is genuinely moving because although there are comedic elements, it does not laugh at itself.
Right.
And it draws the audience in and allows it to become poignant.
Yeah, they are their characters. They're not pretending to be their characters. You know, they're not, like the wink and the nod thing. They're really firmly in their characters.
And because of that culture that's grown up there with the audience there, when the Queen addresses the audience at the end of the day,
they shut up.
Everybody has become accustomed to the fact that we're being addressed by our monarch.
Yeah.
And the audience allows itself to have that meaningful relationship. And the casting is so good that when characters pipe up and speak to the audience, they can connect, in a way that is deeply moving. I mean, I've teared up at that pub sing so many times.
Many times. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's
a ritual space. That's really that everybody brings that sense.
And between Baj, Berinsky, who was the Queen for many years, and
Marilyn,
Maria DeMitchell, and Suzanne Sachs. Now, I mean, these are phenomenal performers.
Yeah,
really talented improvisers. I mean, really incredible performers,
and really strong and wise personalities. People who really took very seriously and take very seriously the mantle that they take on as that role as the monarch, and are able to give to the audience from that space, which is really powerful.
And I've always been very struck and amazed by the fact that America has embraced the monarchy so thoroughly We were once doing the 4th of July parade in Fairhaven, and Frank O'Garo said, I find it very interesting that the Queen Elizabeth is marching in the Independence Day parade. And America has embraced the monarchy probably more than England does. And I find it fascinating that we still long for that mythology.
Maybe one of the keys to the success of Renaissance festivals on some level,
Yeah.
We get to play that space.
Well, and unlike the confusion of this democracy that we find ourselves in.
A strong and benevolent leader is all we really want.
That's all we really want. So I've always been struck by America, loving the Renaissance so much.
When I first started doing Sterling, it was on a biker route. The South Shore of Lake Ontario there is beautiful country biking, and a lot of small bars to stop at. So there are these like real old school Harley bikers who would, their little bike pack would like show up at the gate.
Sure.
For them, it was another pub, but there were pub wenches and cleavage and games of skill to play and axe throwing and knives and a joust, so it was
and sometimes they would get instantly transformed by this. Like they would let go of their biker stuff and like just get real. They'd be dancing on stage and like being part of Kenny's Bob Da Vinci show, and they'd be totally into it. Wearing a tutu and when you can see these bikers in their leathers wearing a tutu and that's the magic of Renaissance fairs to me.
I did not experience this story, but it's so beautiful. There was a guy who ran a fencing game, and the object was you had a full fencing protective gear thing with a balloon on you, on the top of your head, and the idea was to pop the other person's balloon. Well, these two bikers showed up to want to play this game, and this guy was like pulled up and he would dressed as as sort of a gentleman of the fencing master, and so he puffed up all of his martial arts key to address these guys to keep them from wailing at each other and hurting themselves, the equipment, or some random stranger that a broken sword might fly off to, So he's like going through the whole, this is a game of skill and honor. It is not, this is not combat. This is skill and finesse, and you must behave honorably towards each other. And he's starting to get the salutes down and everything. And then up on the hill, the parade starts going by. And the queen is being carried down in her litter down the hill, and the fencing master turns and bows to the queen, and two bikers are kind of looking at each other, and the guy, there's a very tall guy and a very short, swarthy guy, and the short, swarthy guy's next to me says, "Oh, it's the queen," and he goes, "Oh," and he's actually looks at the fencing master and tries to do the whole formal bow thing, and the big guy's kind of looking at them. And the little guy swings his fist and just knocks the guy right in the stomach, which is right about shoulder level to him. And the guy, and he's, "Bow down, motherfucker, it's a queen."
That's great. That's the title of this podcast.
Yeah,
bow
down, it's the queen. Yeah, that was good. This has been the Ren Faire History Podcast presented by Digital Ren Faire. I am Jonathan Crocker of The Wild Men and Theater in the Ground. You can find me at Facebook pages under both those names, as well as moremud.com and wildman.com.
And you can find me, Giacomo the Jester, or Carl Asch on Facebook. You can find me at renadventures.com. You can find me at emptyhats.com. Ciao tutti!